The afternoon sun was soft that day, the kind that made the city streets glow with a golden warmth. People were out and about, some walking dogs, others sipping cold drinks at outdoor cafes. It was one of those calm days when nothing seemed likely to go wrong. Down the road, the steady hum of a motorcycle broke the quiet rhythm. The rider, dressed in a plain gray t-shirt, dark jeans, and a worn leather jacket, slowed as he approached a small coffee shop near the edge of downtown. He wasn't in a rush, just out for a peaceful ride to clear his mind. The engine quieted and he removed his helmet, revealing the familiar face of Jason Statham. He parked near the sidewalk, nodding politely at a few passers-by who recognized him but chose not to disturb him. Jason appreciated that. Fame wasn't something he carried around like a trophy. He preferred to move quietly like anyone else. Inside the cafe, the aroma of roasted beans filled the air. He ordered a black coffee, thanked the barista, and took a seat by the window, where he could see the street and the slow movement of the world outside. For a few minutes, it was peaceful, just the sound of distant chatter, soft music playing from a radio and the comfort of a warm drink in his hands. Then the quiet began to change. The deep, rumbling sound of multiple motorcycle engines filled the street. It wasn't just one or two. It was a group, maybe 6 or 7 riders. Their bikes were loud and flashy, and they rode with the kind of swagger that made people step aside. They parked just a few meters away from where Jason sat, the engines sputtering as they switched them off. Their laughter echoed across the street, sharp and careless. At first, Jason didn't pay much attention. He'd seen all kinds of people in his life, and not every loud group meant trouble. But something about the tone of their voices made him look up. Among them was a young woman walking alone on the sidewalk across the street. She looked no older than her early 20s, wearing a simple white blouse and jeans, carrying a bag of groceries. Her face was calm, her pace steady, the kind of person just minding her own business. But as she walked past the parked bikes, one of the men whistled loudly. Another laughed and said something crude that made her freeze. Jason's eyes narrowed slightly. The sound of mockery grew louder. The girl quickened her steps, keeping her eyes down, pretending not to hear. But the bikers didn't stop. 2 of them revved their engines again, circling closer to the curb, laughing as the noise startled her. A few people standing nearby turned to look, uncertain what to do. One man pulled out his phone to record but didn't step forward. Inside the cafe, Jason set down his cup. His jaw tightened, his calm expression fading into something colder, the look of someone calculating what to do next. He didn't stand immediately. Instead, he watched. He wanted to see how far it would go. The young woman tried to cross the street to get away, but one of the riders pulled his bike slightly in front of her path, blocking her for just a moment. He said something she couldn't make out, but his grin said enough. Jason's chair made a quiet scrape against the floor as he stood. The barista looked up, recognizing that expression on his face, the kind that said he wasn't about to sit and watch. Jason walked out slowly, not rushing, not storming, just calm, steady steps. The sound of his boots against the pavement caught the attention of a few people nearby. The bikers were still laughing when he reached the sidewalk. The woman had backed away a few steps, clutching her grocery bag tightly against her chest. Jason stepped up beside her, placing himself between her and the nearest biker. He didn't say a word at first. He just looked at them, one by one. The leader of the group, a tall man with a thick beard and a sleeveless jacket, raised an eyebrow and smirked. "What's this? You her bodyguard or something?" he asked, his tone mocking. Jason didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the man's bike, then lifted back up to meet his stare. "Relax, old man," another biker said, chuckling. "We're just talking." Jason's voice was quiet but carried weight. "That's not what it looks like." The bearded man leaned back against his bike. "You don't know what you're getting into, mate. Just mind your business." Jason tilted his head slightly, the faintest hint of a smile on his lips. "This is my business," he said. "Right now it is." The air grew tense. The laughter faded. People nearby started whispering, realizing who he was. Cameras came out, but Jason didn't care. He wasn't putting on a show. He was doing what felt right. The leader of the bikers took a step forward, his boots crunching against the pavement. "You think just because you're some movie star we're supposed to be scared?" Jason didn't blink. "No," he said simply. But you should be. The biker scoffed, pretending to laugh it off, but there was unease in his eyes. Something about Jason's calmness and that quiet control made him hesitate. He looked around at his group, trying to keep the upper hand. "We didn't touch her," he said. "You got no reason to," Jason interrupted, his tone sharp but even. "You don't have to touch someone to cross a line." The young woman stood behind him, tears glistening in her eyes, unsure if she should say anything. Jason turned his head slightly and said softly, "You're all right. Just take a step back." She nodded, her voice too shaky to answer, and moved behind him toward the cafe entrance. The leader seemed unsure now. He kicked the stand of his bike, pretending to be casual, but his hands twitched at his sides. "Man, this is stupid," he muttered. "Let's go." But one of the younger bikers, smaller, restless, clearly trying to prove something, decided he wanted the last word. He revved his engine loudly, spitting exhaust into the air, then jerked his bike forward a few inches, stopping just short of Jason's boots. Jason didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He simply leaned down, and before anyone could react, he reached forward, plucked the key straight out of the ignition, and stepped back. The biker froze, confused. Jason held the key loosely between his fingers, looked at it, then looked up at the man. "You dropped this," he said quietly, and set it on the ground. For a second, no one moved. Then, from somewhere across the street, someone started clapping. Another joined. Within moments, a few bystanders were cheering softly. Not loud, but enough to break the tension. The leader glanced around, realizing the crowd wasn't on their side anymore. He glared at Jason, but didn't say another word. One by one, the bikers started their engines again. The sound roared through the air as they pulled away, some shaking their heads, others refusing to look back. Jason stood there until the noise faded into the distance. Then he turned toward the young woman who was still standing by the cafe door, trembling slightly but smiling through her tears. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes. Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The next morning started quietly. The sky was gray and the streets were still damp from a light rain that had fallen overnight. The city was slowly waking up. The sound of buses, car horns, and people rushing to work filled the air. Jason sat by his kitchen window with a cup of tea, watching the drops of rain slide down the glass. He wasn't thinking about the day before. For him, stepping in to help someone wasn't something that needed to be remembered. It was just something you did. But for everyone else who had been there, the moment hadn't faded so easily. Someone had recorded the whole thing, the bikers, the tension, and the calm way Jason had handled it. By morning, the clip had started spreading online. People were calling it the real-life movie moment. Comments poured in, praising his control and courage. Jason didn't know any of this yet. He liked his quiet mornings and rarely checked his phone until later in the day. When he finally did, he saw dozens of messages, friends, colleagues, and people from his film crew sending links to the video. He sighed softly, set the phone down, and muttered, "Of course someone filmed it." Still, he couldn't help but scroll through some of the messages. Most of them were kind. People saying things like, "You're a real hero," or "That girl was lucky you were there." But Jason didn't see himself that way. He just saw someone who happened to be in the right place at the right time. After breakfast, he decided to head out. The sky had cleared a little and he had errands to run. He put on his jacket, grabbed his helmet, and walked to the garage. The engine of his motorcycle rumbled to life, deep and steady. As he rode through the streets, the wind brushed against his face and the noise of the city faded behind him. He didn't ride fast, just enough to feel the rhythm of the road. Riding had always been his escape, the one place where his mind could be still. He stopped at a small grocery store near the park. As he parked his bike and walked toward the entrance, a voice called out, "Hey man, you're the guy from the video, right?" Jason looked over. A young man in his 20s was standing by the door, holding his phone up excitedly. Jason gave a small smile. "I guess that depends on the video," the man laughed. "The one where you stopped those bikers. Everyone's been talking about it." "That was amazing." Jason shook his head lightly. "It wasn't amazing. It was just common sense." The young man nodded, still grinning. "Yeah, but most people wouldn't have done anything. You actually stepped in. That takes guts." Jason didn't know what to say to that. He appreciated the words, but the truth was simpler. He didn't like bullies. Never had. He gave the man a polite nod and went inside. The store was quiet, filled with the smell of fresh bread and coffee. As he walked down the aisles, he iced a few people glancing his way. Some smiled shyly. Others whispered to each other. It was strange, how a single act could suddenly turn an ordinary day into something people couldn't stop talking about. When he reached the counter, the cashier, an older woman with kind eyes, looked up and said, "I saw what you did yesterday." "That was brave, dear." Jason smiled gently. "Thank you, but honestly, anyone would have done the same." She shook her head. "Not everyone would. People are afraid of trouble. But the world needs more calm people, people who don't let fear win." Her words lingered in his mind even after he left. He rode off again, the grocery bag hanging from the back of his bike, thinking about what she'd said. Maybe she was right. Maybe too many people had forgotten how to act when something wrong was happening right in front of them. As he passed the same cafe from yesterday, he slowed down. The memory of the moment flashed briefly, the young woman's scared eyes, the roar of the bikes, the tense silence afterward. He wondered if she was okay. Then, as if fate had heard him, he spotted a familiar figure sitting on a bench across the street. It was her, the young woman from yesterday. She had her hands wrapped around a paper cup, looking lost in thought. Jason parked his bike and walked toward her. She noticed him only when he was a few steps away. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened. "I didn't think I'd see you again," she said quietly. He smiled. "I wasn't planning on it either. Just passing through." She gave a small laugh. "I wanted to thank you again. I didn't get the chance yesterday." "You already did," he said. "You don't owe me anything," she hesitated. "Maybe not, but if you hadn't stepped in, I don't know what would have happened." No one else tried to help. Jason looked out at the street. People freeze when they don't know what to do. It's not always because they don't care. Sometimes they just hesitate. She nodded slowly, understanding what he meant. After a pause, she said, "It's strange. I keep thinking about that moment, about how fast everything happened. I felt invisible before you walked up, like no one saw me even though I was right there." Jason looked at her with quiet empathy. "You're not invisible now." For a moment they both sat silently, listening to the faint hum of the city. Then she said, "You know, the video's everywhere. My friend sent it to me this morning. I didn't even realize someone was filming." Jason let out a dry chuckle. "Seems like everything's a movie these days." She smiled faintly. "I guess people need stories to remind them there's still good in the world." He looked at her and said softly, "There's always good in the world. You just have to look in the right places." The conversation felt easy, natural. There was no awkwardness, no fame, no fear. Just two people who happened to cross paths at the right moment. Eventually, she stood and said, "I should get going. Thank you again, not just for what you did, but for reminding me that there are still people who care." Jason nodded. "Take care of yourself." She smiled, and as she walked away, he noticed she carried herself differently now. Her shoulders straighter, her steps lighter. It made him feel something he hadn't expected. A quiet sense of peace. Later that afternoon, Jason met with a friend from the film industry at a small diner. The friend had already seen the video, of course, and couldn't resist bringing it up. "Mate, you've gone viral again," his friend said, grinning. "And this time it's not even a movie trailer." Jason rolled his eyes. "Don't start." "I'm serious," his friend continued. "People love it. They're saying it's the most Jason Statham thing ever. Calm, controlled, fearless. It's all over social media." Jason shook his head. "That's the problem. Everyone's watching, but no one's learning." "It's not about me," his friend leaned forward. "Maybe not. But sometimes people need a face to remind them what courage looks like. You showed that you don't need violence to stand up for someone." Jason looked down at his cup of tea. "Courage isn't about being loud. It's about staying steady when it matters." His friend smiled. "That's exactly why people respect you." The next few days passed quietly, but the world outside wasn't so quiet. The video from the cafe was still spreading everywhere. Across social media, news sites, even morning TV shows. People were calling it everything from a perfect example of calm courage to proof that good people still exist. Jason didn't really pay attention to it. He had seen how the internet could twist stories, turn something simple into something much bigger than it really was. For him, it wasn't a heroic moment. It was just something that happened, something anyone with a bit of heart would have done. Still, every time he went outside, someone recognized him. At the grocery store, on his morning jog, even at the gas station, people smiled, waved, or came up to shake his hand. "You're the guy from that video." They'd say, "You really showed those bikers." Jason would just smile politely. "I just didn't want anyone getting hurt," he'd reply. Most people meant well, but the attention made him uncomfortable. He wasn't used to being the center of real-world drama, at least not outside of movie sets. One afternoon, while stopping by a small bookstore downtown, he noticed something unusual. A man was sitting at a corner table with a newspaper open in front of him, staring directly at Jason. He looked tough, older, with a leather jacket and weathered hands, the kind of person who had seen his share of hard roads. When Jason moved toward the counter, the man got up and followed him. "You handled those boys the other day," the man said, his voice rough but calm. "Saw the video," Jason glanced at him. "Yeah, looks like a lot of people did." The man nodded. "They were part of a local group. Been causing trouble for a while. Loud bikes, bad tempers, too much to prove." Jason stayed silent, sensing there was more coming. The man went on. "They've been talking since that day. Not happy about how things went down." Jason raised an eyebrow. "You saying they're planning something?" The man shrugged. "Not sure. But when pride's hurt, people sometimes do stupid things." Jason thanked him and walked out, his expression thoughtful but calm. He wasn't afraid. He'd dealt with worse situations in his life, but he didn't like the idea of more trouble brewing. That night, he went for a ride to clear his mind. The city light stretched out beneath him as he rode along the coastal road. The air was cool, the sky painted in shades of deep blue and silver. The rhythm of the engine helped him think. He kept replaying what the man said. Could those bikers really be planning something? Or was it just talk? Halfway down the road, he stopped at a quiet lookout spot by the water. The waves were hitting the rocks below, and the wind carried the smell of salt and rain. He turned off the bike and leaned against the railing, staring out at the dark horizon. He wasn't worried about himself. He was thinking about the young woman he had helped. What if they tried to find her? What if they wanted to scare her for revenge? The thought didn't sit right with him. After a few minutes, he took out his phone and opened the local news page. There was nothing new, no reports of trouble, no updates on the bikers. Still, his gut told him to stay alert. The next morning, he decided to stop by the cafe again. Not for attention, just to make sure everything was normal. The place was busier than usual. People were chatting, laughing, sipping coffee. The world had moved on, as it always does. But as Jason walked in, a few heads turned. Someone whispered his name. The barista smiled warmly. "Good morning." "The usual?" He nodded, setting his helmet down on the counter. "Yeah, that'd be great." As he waited, he noticed 2 motorcycles parked across the street. His eyes narrowed slightly. Same model, same color as the ones from that day. He didn't want to assume, but his instincts were never wrong. He stayed calm, sipping his coffee slowly, pretending not to notice. The bikers weren't looking at him directly, but he could feel their attention. They were waiting, testing. After a few minutes, one of them started the engine. The noise roared through the quiet street. People turned their heads. Jason finished his coffee, placed the cup down, and stepped outside. The 2 bikers revved their engines, trying to provoke a reaction. Jason just stood there, calm, watching. Finally, one of them shouted, "You think you embarrassed us, huh?" Jason didn't reply. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than words. The other biker shouted again, "You made us look weak in front of everyone." Jason took a few slow steps forward. "You made yourselves look weak," he said evenly. "All I did was stop you from hurting someone." The first biker glared. "You don't get it. You made us a joke online." Jason looked at him quietly, then said, "Then maybe it's time you stop acting like one." There was a tense pause. The air between them felt heavy. Then one of the bikers kicked his stand-up and tried to speed forward, not toward Jason, but to scare him. The tires screeched on the pavement, the bike jerking slightly to the side. Jason didn't move. He stood perfectly still, his eyes steady. When the biker stopped just a few feet away, Jason leaned slightly closer and said in a low, calm voice, "You're angry because the world saw what you really are. But that's not my fault. That's yours." The biker clenched his jaw, but something in Jason's tone, calm, controlled, certain, broke through the noise. He didn't shout back. He just stared for a moment, then turned his head away. The other one muttered something under his breath but didn't step forward. They both looked uncertain now, their bravado fading. Jason took a step back. "Go home," he said quietly. "You've already done enough damage." "Done?" "It make it worse." For a long moment no one moved. Then the engines roared again, and the two bikes peeled away down the street, the sound fading into the distance. The crowd that had gathered outside the cafe slowly started to relax. People began talking again, whispering about what they'd just seen. Jason turned back to the barista, who looked both relieved and amazed. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, just another day." She shook her head with a small smile. "I don't know how you stay so calm." He shrugged lightly. "You don't calm a storm by shouting at it." He left the cafe shortly after, but his mind was still on edge. It wasn't fear, it was instinct. He knew that kind of anger didn't just disappear overnight. The bikers had felt humiliated, and humiliated people often looked for someone to blame. That evening, Jason sat at home. The lights dimmed. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock were the only sounds in the room. He stared at the wall for a while, thinking about the choices people make when they feel powerless. He thought about the bikers, young men who wanted to look strong but didn't understand what real strength was. He thought about the girl, probably trying to move on, maybe still afraid to walk alone. He thought about himself, too, how life had a way of testing you when you least expected it. A knock on the door broke his thoughts. When he opened it, the same young woman stood there holding a small paper bag. "I didn't mean to bother you," she said shyly. "I just wanted to thank you properly. I brought you something." The days that followed were quieter, almost peaceful, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting just around the corner. Despite the calm in his daily routine, the events of the last week kept circling in his mind. He couldn't get the image of the bikers out of his head. Even though they had backed off that day, he knew they weren't the type to let things slide. They were the kind of men who needed to prove something. Jason had been in enough difficult situations to recognize that kind of pride, and he knew how dangerous it could be when it was wounded. A few days after the confrontation, while Jason was on his usual ride around the city, he got a call from a number he didn't recognize. At first he let it ring, not wanting to be bothered, but something told him to answer. Maybe it was his intuition, maybe just a need for something different to break the silence. "Hello?" he said, his voice steady but cautious. "Is this Jason Statham?" the voice on the other end asked. It was a deep, gravelly voice, one that had a certain edge to it. Jason felt his instincts kick in. "Who's asking?" There was a pause, then the voice spoke again, this time slower. "I'm someone who has a problem with you." Jason's heart skipped. He didn't need to be told who the person on the other side was. He'd heard enough in the tone to know. This was one of the bikers, one of the ones who had been angry after the cafe incident. Jason sighed inwardly. "What do you want? I don't appreciate how you handled things the other day. You think you can just step in, talk down to us, make us look weak in front of everyone?" The man spat, his anger barely contained. Jason didn't flinch. "What's your point?" The voice lowered, colder now. "I'm giving you a chance to apologize. You can walk away, let things go, or..." There was a deliberate pause. "Or you'll find out just how much damage a few people can do when they're angry." Jason's mind raced for a second. He wasn't sure what this man meant, but he didn't like the implication. He'd been around long enough to know when things were about to turn ugly. But he refused to show fear. He had faced worse threats, and this was no different. "I didn't do anything wrong. You brought this on yourselves," Jason said, his voice calm but firm. "If you want to keep going with this, fine. But don't expect me to apologize for standing up for what's right." The man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We'll see how long that attitude lasts. You've made an enemy, Statham. Don't forget that." Before Jason could respond, the line went dead. He stood still for a moment, his mind going through the possible scenarios. He didn't believe in threats, and they were just words. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Jason spent the rest of the day trying to distract himself. He went on another ride, met some friends for a casual dinner, but the conversation kept drifting back to the same place. The bikers, the video, the threats. Late that night, Jason found himself alone at home, staring out at the city from his window. The streets were dark, almost deserted, but he knew that the quiet only lasted for so long. He didn't want to get caught up in another confrontation, but he wasn't the kind of person to back down either. He wasn't worried about his own safety. He had been through much worse in his life. But what bothered him more than anything was the idea that someone else might be caught in the crossfire. His thoughts drifted back to the young woman from the cafe. After the bikers had left that day, she had thanked him, and he had done his best to reassure her that she was safe. But what if they came after her? He couldn't shake the thought of her getting hurt because of something he had done. He grabbed his phone, deciding to text her. He wasn't sure what he'd say, but he felt the need to check in. "Hey, it's Jason. I just wanted to make sure you're okay after everything that happened. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. Take care." He sent it, then put the phone down, leaning back in his chair. His fingers drummed absently on the armrest, his thoughts racing. Not long after the phone buzzed, it was a message from her. "I'm fine. Just a little shaken up, but nothing I can't handle. I've actually been getting a lot of support from people, so that helps. I really appreciate you checking in." Jason felt a small sense of relief reading her message. She sounded stronger than before, and that was a good sign. Still, he knew that it wasn't over. The bikers were still out there, and their pride had been bruised. If they weren't going to stop now, Jason was going to have to do whatever it took to make sure they didn't cause any more trouble. Over the next few days, Jason kept a low profile. He didn't want to draw attention, but he also didn't want to be caught off guard. He went about his normal routine, running errands, meeting people, riding his bike, but with his eyes open, always alert. Then one evening, as he was heading back to his apartment after a long day, he got a call from the same number again. He didn't hesitate this time. "Yeah?" Jason answered, his voice sharp and clear. "You're still a problem, Statham." The man's voice crackled through the phone, low and threatening. Jason's stomach tightened. "You've got to be kidding me." "No joke," the man said. "And you're not the only one who's been waiting. You'll know when the time's right." Jason's hand tightened around his phone. "I'm not going anywhere." "You want to fight? Come find me." Another pause. "We'll see," the man said, his tone colder than before. Before Jason could say anything else, the call ended. This time, Jason couldn't ignore the feeling in his gut. The threats had escalated. It wasn't just about him anymore. The bikers were planning something, and Jason had a sinking feeling that it wasn't going to end quietly. The next morning, he woke up early, grabbed his bike keys, and headed out. He wasn't going to wait for trouble to come knocking. He was going to make sure the trouble didn't find anyone else, especially not the young woman he had helped. Jason kept his eyes open on the road, watching for anything unusual. He didn't know what he was looking for exactly, but his gut told him that he needed to be vigilant. His phone buzzed again while Jason moved quickly through the streets, his mind sharp, his focus absolute. The sun had just begun to set, casting long shadows across the city. Every corner he passed, every streetlight he saw, reminded him that the city had its quiet dangers, its unpredictable moments. He wasn't scared, but he was aware, acutely aware, that tonight could change everything. He pulled up near her building, parking his bike out of sight. From there, he could see the parking lot below, the dim glow of the street lamps illuminating the edges of the asphalt. And there they were, two of the bikers leaning against their motorcycles, scanning the building. Their voices were low, filled with a mix of impatience and arrogance. They clearly didn't expect him to be here. Jason took a deep breath. He didn't want violence. That was never his plan. But he also wasn't about to let them intimidate her or anyone else. He thought back to the last few days, the phone calls, the threats, her fear. Enough was enough. He slipped quietly inside the building, taking the stairwell instead of the elevator. Every step echoed softly in the empty hallway. He reached her door, listening for any sounds. She was inside, thankfully safe for now, but scared. He knocked gently. She opened the door just a crack, peeking out. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "Jason," she whispered, a mix of relief and worry in her voice. "Stay calm," he said softly. "They're outside, but we're going to handle this." Her voice trembled. I don't know what to do. I don't want them to hurt anyone." Jason shook his head. "No one's getting hurt. Not tonight. But you need to stay calm and follow my instructions." He led her to a safe corner inside the apartment, out of view from the windows. Lock all doors and windows. Make it look like no one's home. She nodded quickly, doing as he said. Jason moved to the windows, peeking through the blinds. The bikers were still there, talking quietly, scanning the building. They hadn't noticed him yet. He took a step back, thinking fast. The goal wasn't to scare them with anger. As to show them calmly and clearly that their behavior was unacceptable, that they had no power here. Jason pulled out his phone and started recording from inside the window, capturing them in the lot. The moment he knew someone had video proof of their intimidation, their arrogance and false bravado would crumble. Then he stepped outside, into the dim light of the hallway, making sure his presence was noticed. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He simply stepped out, calm and collected, and let them see him. One of the bikers finally noticed. "Hey, what are you doing here?" he shouted, his voice sharp though tinged with surprise. Jason didn't reply immediately. He simply raised his hand, holding up the phone to show them he was recording. His eyes locked onto the leader, steady and unwavering. "You've been making threats," he said finally, his voice quiet but commanding. "You've been trying to intimidate someone who had nothing to do with you. And you're doing it because you think you can get away with it." The bikers exchanged glances. Their laughter faded. The tone of the moment had shifted, and they sensed it immediately. Jason didn't need to yell. He didn't need to make a scene. His calmness, his certainty was enough. "You've been wrong from the start," he continued. "And now, everyone watching can see who's really out of control. You have a choice. Leave. Walk away before this gets worse." The leader stepped forward, his chest puffed out, trying to maintain authority. "And if we don't?" Jason didn't flinch. He stepped closer, slowly, without aggression. "Then you'll prove to the world exactly how small you are. But I promise you this, no one will get hurt tonight. Except maybe your pride." There was a long pause. The tension in the parking lot was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jason's calm voice was louder than any engine rev, louder than any threat, and it worked. The smaller biker muttered something under his breath, glancing nervously at the other vehicles in the lot. They both knew the game had changed. This was no longer about intimidation or bravado. This was about accountability. Finally, the leader cursed quietly, muttered something under his breath, and kicked at the asphalt. "Let's go," he said, more to himself than the other biker. They mounted their bikes and drove off, the sound of the engines fading into the distance. Jason watched them leave, making sure they didn't double back. Only when he was certain they were gone did he allow himself to exhale. He went back inside, where the young woman was still sitting quietly, her hands trembling slightly. She looked up at him, eyes wide. "Are they gone?" Jason nodded. "Yeah, they're gone. You're safe now." Tears welled in her eyes. I don't even know what to say. "I was so scared." He smiled gently. "You don't have to say anything. You stayed calm. You followed instructions. That's what kept you safe." For a long moment, they just sat there, the quiet settling in around them. Outside, the city continued its normal rhythm. Cars passing, people walking, the distant hum of life. But inside, the tension of the last week finally began to lift. Jason stayed until she felt fully calm, until she knew for certain that the danger had passed. He didn't need thanks. Seeing her safe was enough. When he finally left, the streets were dark, the city lights reflecting on the wet pavement from an earlier rain. He walked back to his bike, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. Not pride, not glory, just relief. The next morning, life started to return to normal. The young woman was careful but confident. She went about her day, still cautious but knowing that she had someone in her corner if anything happened again. Jason kept riding through the city, visiting places he liked, keeping to his routine, but there was a new sense of peace in the air. The bikers had learned a lesson, that intimidation and aggression weren't always the answer. That sometimes quiet courage and calm decisiveness could be far stronger than threats or noise. Over the following days, the video of the confrontation outside her building spread online. People praised Jason for the calm and controlled way he had handled the situation. Comments poured in about his bravery, but more than that, people talked about the message behind it. Courage didn't have to be loud, justice didn't have to involve violence, and standing up for someone could change everything. For Jason, it wasn't about the attention. He didn't need recognition or applause. He didn't even think of himself as a hero. He thought about the girl and the fact that she could continue her life without fear, and that was enough. Even later, when reporters tried to get a statement, he stayed true to his nature. "I just did what anyone would do," he said. "It's about doing the right thing. Sometimes the world needs someone to stand up calmly and remind people of that." The young woman, meanwhile, felt a newfound confidence. She realized that courage wasn't just for heroes on screen. It could be quiet, it could be controlled, and it could be present in someone who didn't seek attention, someone who simply acted when it mattered. Weeks later, Jason returned to the cafe one last time. The barista smiled, remembering the calm but tense week that had changed everything. He nodded, ordered his usual coffee, and sat quietly by the window, reflecting. The world went on around him, full of noise, chaos, and unpredictable moments. But inside, he felt that the right thing had been done. Sometimes that was all anyone could hope for. The story of that week became more than just a viral video. It became an example for others, a reminder that courage didn't always have to roar. Sometimes it simply walked calmly through the chaos, steady and unwavering, protecting the innocent, and showing the world that fear could be faced without aggression. Jason took a sip of his coffee, looking out the window at the city streets. He didn't need applause. He didn't need attention. He just needed the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when it counted, he had done the right thing. And for now, that was enough. Stopped at a red light. It was a message from her. "You haven't heard from them, have you?" Jason raised an eyebrow. He had a bad feeling about this. "No, but I'm keeping an eye out." Why, she responded almost instantly. "I got a strange message this morning. It was from a private number. They said if I don't stop talking about the video, they'll come after me." Jason's heart dropped. He knew exactly what this was. It was the bikers. They were targeting her now, trying to intimidate her into silence. Without a second thought, Jason texted back, "I want you to stay somewhere safe. Don't go anywhere alone and don't answer any strange calls. I'm on my way." He put the phone down, his mind focused now. This wasn't just about standing up to a group of bikers anymore. It was about protecting someone who had already been through too much. He sped through the streets, heading toward her neighborhood. He didn't know exactly where she was, but he'd find her. As he approached her building, his phone buzzed again. This time it was her calling. "Jason!" she said, panic in her voice. "They're here. They've been watching me." His pulse quickened. "Stay where you are. Don't go outside." "I can't. I'm on the 3rd floor. I can see them in the parking lot." Jason swore under his breath. He needed to act fast. "I'm coming up." "Stay inside and don't open the door to anyone." He hung up, his mind focused now more than ever. There was no more time for waiting. He had to do what he should have done from the start. Make sure the bikers knew they had messed with the wrong person. He smiled. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." She handed him the bag. Inside was a small box of homemade cookies. Jason chuckled softly. "You made these?" She nodded. "Yeah, I like baking when I'm nervous. It helps." He gestured for her to come in. "Well, that's the best kind of therapy I've heard of." They sat at the small kitchen table, sharing the cookies and talking. The conversation flowed easily. She told him about her work, her family, and how the last few days had been filled with messages of support from strangers who saw the video. "It's strange," she said. "Something bad turned into something good. People keep telling me the story gave them hope." Jason smiled. "Then maybe it was worth all the noise." She looked thoughtful. "You really think so?" He nodded. "Sometimes the world needs to be reminded that kindness still exists. It doesn't have to be loud or perfect, just real." They talked for a while longer before she stood to leave. "Thank you again," she said softly. "Not just for that day, but for today too," Jason smiled. "Anytime." When she left, the house felt quiet again, but in a peaceful way. The air felt lighter, calmer. He walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. The world outside was full of noise, people shouting, cars honking, sirens echoing in the distance. But in that moment, everything felt still. He realized something simple yet powerful. Sometimes life brings trouble not to test your strength, but to remind you who you are. He turned off the light. The faint sound of the waves outside whispering in the distance. Tomorrow would come with its noise and stories and endless chatter, but tonight there was calm. And for Jason, that was enough. Jason didn't respond. He didn't do it for respect. He didn't even think of it as courage. It was just instinct, something human. As the day went on, the online buzz grew louder. News outlets picked up the story, turning it into headlines. Action star becomes real-life hero. Jason Statham steps in to stop harassment. The story spread across platforms, shared by fans around the world. But for Jason, life went on as usual. He still preferred the quiet, simple meals, long rides, and time away from the noise. He didn't need the attention. He just happy.